The warm glow of candlelight filled the intimate bistro as Emma nervously adjusted her navy blue dress and checked her phone for the third time. At 29, she had finally agreed to her first blind date in years, encouraged by her best friend, Rachel, who insisted that Emma's confidence had grown tremendously since she'd started her new job as a social worker. Emma had always struggled with her weight, but more recently she'd been working on accepting herself and focusing on her health and happiness rather than a number on a scale. Tonight felt like a test of that newfound self-acceptance. A man approached her table, and Emma recognized him from the photo Rachel had shown her. Tall, well-dressed, with perfectly styled hair and an expression that quickly shifted from polite interest to poorly concealed disappointment. "Emma?" he asked, though his tone already suggested he was looking for an exit strategy. "Yes, that's me. You must be Derek." Emma smiled warmly, though she could already sense the shift in his demeanor. Derek sat down reluctantly, immediately pulling out his phone. "Listen, I'm going to be honest with you. Rachel didn't mention that you were, well, this isn't really what I was expecting." Emma felt the familiar sting of judgment, but something was different this time. Instead of the crushing shame she might have felt years ago, she found herself feeling more disappointed in Derek's character than concerned about his opinion of her appearance. "I see. And what exactly were you expecting?" Derek looked uncomfortable, glancing around the restaurant as if hoping for rescue. "Look, I'm sure you're a nice person, but I'm really focused on fitness and health right now. I need someone who shares those priorities." Emma studied his face, noting the assumption that her worth could be determined by his quick visual assessment. "Derek, I run half marathons, I'm training for a triathlon, and I volunteer at a community garden on weekends. But I understand if you've already made your decision about me." At the table next to them, a man in a well-tailored gray jacket had been trying to focus on his business documents, but the conversation was impossible to ignore. Alexander had been dining alone, as he often did when traveling for work, but the woman's grace under obvious rudeness caught his attention. Derek barely heard Emma's response, already signaling the waiter. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we should call it a night." "Of course," Emma replied with dignity that impressed the eavesdropping stranger. "I hope you find what you're looking for." As Derek left with barely a goodbye, Emma sat, quietly for a moment processing her emotions. She felt disappointed but not devastated, hurt but not diminished. The growth she'd worked so hard to achieve was holding steady. "Excuse me," came a voice from the adjacent table. Emma looked up to see the man in the gray jacket approaching with a kind expression. "I couldn't help but overhear what just happened. I'm Alexander, and I was wondering if you'd allow me to buy you dinner." Emma studied his face carefully, searching for any sign of pity or misplaced sympathy. Instead, she found genuine warmth and what appeared to be respect. "That's very kind, but I don't need rescuing from my failed date." Alexander smiled, and Emma noticed how it reached his eyes. "I wasn't offering rescue. I was hoping for good company. I'm in town on business, dining alone, and I just witnessed someone handle an unpleasant situation with remarkable grace. I thought perhaps we could have an interesting conversation." Emma considered his offer. There was something in his manner that suggested sincerity rather than charity. "What kind of business brings you to town?" "I run a nonprofit that develops community wellness programs. We're looking at expanding here." Alexander gestured to the empty chair at Emma's table. "May I?" As they talked over dinner, Emma discovered that Alexander's work focused on holistic community health, addressing food access, mental health support, and creating inclusive spaces for physical activity. His passion for the work was evident, and Emma found herself sharing her own experiences in social work. "You mentioned training for a triathlon," Alexander said as they shared dessert. "What got you interested in that?" Emma smiled, remembering her journey. "I wanted to prove to myself that my body could do amazing things, regardless of how it looks. The training has taught me that strength and endurance come in many different forms. That's a powerful perspective. In my work, I see so many people who've been told their bodies aren't good enough in some way. It takes real courage to define your own relationship with health and fitness. Their conversation flowed naturally from professional interests to books, travel, and life philosophies. Alexander shared his own struggles with work-life balance and the pressure he felt to represent his organization perfectly in public settings. "I have to ask," Emma said as the evening wound down, "why did you really invite yourself to join me tonight? I'm not fishing for compliments. I'm genuinely curious." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because in 30 seconds, you demonstrated more emotional intelligence and self-respect than most people show in 30 minutes. Because you didn't let someone else's narrow perspective diminish your sense of worth. And because I've learned that the most interesting people are usually the ones who've had to develop character through adversity." Emma felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that this man saw her as a complete person rather than a collection of physical attributes to be evaluated. "Alexander, I appreciate your honesty. Can I be equally direct? Please. I've spent years working on accepting myself and building a life I'm proud of. Tonight could have been devastating to my self-esteem, but instead it reminded me how far I've come. Meeting you has been an unexpected gift." 3 months later, Emma and Alexander sat in the same bistro celebrating the launch of his organization's new program in her city. Emma had become a key consultant on the project, bringing her expertise in community outreach and her understanding of how to create truly inclusive wellness initiatives. "Emma," Alexander said, reaching across the table to take her hand, "I have something to tell you. That sounds serious? I've been offered a permanent position here to run the regional office. It would mean staying in the city instead of traveling constantly." Emma felt her heart skip. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I'd need to discuss it with the most important person in my life." Emma smiled, understanding that the evening that had started with rejection had led to the most meaningful relationship she'd ever experienced. Not because Alexander had rescued her from Derek's rudeness, but because he had recognized her worth when she had learned to recognize it herself. "Alexander, that night when you joined me for dinner, you said you were hoping for good company and interesting conversation. I was. And I got far more than I hoped for." Emma squeezed his hand gently. "So did I. I learned that the right person doesn't fall in love with you despite your imperfections. They fall in love with you, imperfections included, because they see the whole person." As they left the restaurant that night, Emma reflected on how drastically her life had changed since that difficult evening months ago. Derek's rejection had stung, but it had also confirmed that she deserved someone who could see her value immediately. Alexander had taught her that true attraction is based on character, shared values, and genuine connection. The woman who had once feared judgment for her appearance had become someone who understood that the most beautiful thing about any person is their capacity to grow, to love, and to treat others with dignity. And sometimes, the most unexpected interruptions lead to the most extraordinary new chapters.